The sun hung low over Silver Creek, casting long shadows across the quiet desert town. Inside Maggie's diner, the scent of bacon and fresh coffee mixed with the dry heat of the afternoon. A few regulars sat at their usual booths, chatting idly about nothing in particular. At a corner table near the window, Ethan Hayes sat in silence. His worn leather jacket rested over his broad shoulders, and his dark sunglasses hid his lifeless eyes. A small plate of half-eaten eggs and toast sat in front of him, and touched for the past few minutes. At his feet, his Belgian Malinois Rex lay still, his ears twitching slightly as if listening to something no one else could hear. Ethan took a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't need to see to know someone was watching him. The diner's bell jingled as the door swung open, letting in a gust of hot dessert air. The casual chatter inside the diner died down, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Derek Blaze Sullivan stepped inside, flanked by 5 men clad in leather jackets, each sporting the unmistakable emblem of the Iron Vultures, a biker gang known for causing trouble around Silver Creek. Blaze ran a hand through his greasy blonde hair and smirked as he scanned the room. His gaze landed on Ethan, and his smirk widened. Well, what do we have here? Blaze sauntered over, his boots thudding heavily against the diner floor. A blind man and his mutt. Ain't that a pitiful sight? Rex didn't move, but Ethan could feel the tension in his dog's body. He remained calm, stirring his coffee with deliberate patience. There are plenty of other seats, Ethan said, his voice even. No need to bother me. Blaze chuckled, sliding into the booth across from Ethan without invitation. His men surrounded the table, casting dark shadows over Ethan and Rex. No, Blaze drawled. I think I like it right here. Ain't every day I get to meet a war hero who lost his sight playing soldier. He leaned in, grinning. Tell me, old man, does it still hurt knowing you got left in the dark? A ripple of laughter spread through the gang. Ethan exhaled slowly. He had dealt with men like this before, bullies who mistook kindness for weakness. He reached down, fingers grazing Rex's fur in a silent command. Blaze's amusement flickered as he noticed the movement. What's the matter? Need your little mutt to protect you? He reached forward, fingers aiming for Ethan's sunglasses. Big mistake. Before his hand could make contact, Rex moved. The Belgian Malinois shot up from the ground with lightning-fast reflexes, his powerful jaws clamping down just inches from Blaze's fingers. The biker yelped and jerked back, falling against the table as the diner erupted in gasps. Rex didn't bite, he didn't need to. His growl was low and deep, a sound that sent a clear message: try that again, and you'll lose that hand. Blaze's face twisted in rage. You son of a... Ethan finally moved. With one swift motion, he pushed his chair back and stood. Though his eyes were useless, his body was still as sharp as ever. His stance was steady, calculated. Walk away, Ethan said, his voice low but carrying weight. Now, Blaze looked around, seeing the silent, expectant faces of the diner patrons. Even his own men hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The tension held for a beat too long. Then Blaze spat on the floor. You'll regret this, old man. Without another word, he turned and stomped toward the door, his men following closely behind. As the gang's motorcycles roared to life outside, Ethan sat back down, resting a hand on Rex's head. The diner slowly came back to life, but their knees remained. Maggie, the owner, walked over, placing a fresh cup of coffee in front of Ethan. You just made yourself some dangerous enemies, she said softly. Ethan took a sip, his lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. They started it. The sun dipped lower over Silver Creek, painting the desert sky in hues of orange and deep crimson. Despite its picturesque appearance, the town was far from peaceful. Shadows stretched across Main Street, where businesses were starting to close early, not out of routine, but out of fear. The Iron Vultures had been making their presence known, and everyone in town could feel the change. Just last week, Charlie's auto shop had been trashed after the owner refused to pay protection fees. A few days later, a local grocer was found beaten in an alley, his inventory ransacked. This wasn't just random violence. It was a message. At the far end of town, in the parking lot of a rundown motel, a black Dodge Charger sat quietly, its engine humming softly. Inside, Special Agent Jessica Monroe tapped her fingers against the steering wheel, her sharp blue eyes watching the town unfold through her windshield. Jessica had been sent here on a simple surveillance mission, but things were turning out to be far worse than the Bureau had predicted. The Iron Vultures were just foot soldiers. The real problem: La Sombra Negra, a cartel spreading its influence across small desert towns like Silver Creek, turning them into drug hubs. And now, they were here. Jessica exhaled, rubbing her temple as she flipped through a folder on the passenger seat. Derek Blaze Sullivan, leader of the Iron Vultures, a thug with an ego and a short temper. Diego Valdez, the real power behind the scenes, a cartel boss known for turning entire towns into chemical factories. Sheriff Daniel Graves, a once respected lawman, now caught between duty and the cartel's growing influence. She glanced at the last file in the folder. Ethan Hayes, a decorated Army Ranger, now blind. He wasn't supposed to be part of this. He was supposed to be just another civilian trying to live a quiet life. But tonight at Maggie's diner, he proved he wasn't someone to underestimate. Jessica grabbed her radio, dialing into her FBI contact. "I need confirmation. Has there been any known interaction between La Sombra Negra and the Iron Vultures?" The voice on the other end crackled. "Affirmative. We intercepted a shipment last month linked to both groups. Whatever's happening in Silver Creek, it's more than just a biker gang." Jessica clenched her jaw. This town was in trouble. And the only wild card in this whole equation: the blind soldier who just made enemies with the wrong people. Across town, inside the Silver Creek Sheriff's Department, Sheriff Daniel Graves sat at his cluttered desk, staring at a half-empty bottle of whiskey. The weight on his shoulders felt heavier every day. He had spent 20 years trying to keep this town safe. But now, the wolves were already inside the gates. La Sombra Negra wasn't just another cartel. They weren't here to make quick money and leave. They were here to take over, to turn Silver Creek into one of their many strongholds. The worst part: they weren't working alone. Graves had already lost to deputies. One quit after a brutal warning from the cartel. The other simply disappeared. The rest of his men, half of them were too scared to act, and the other half, bought and paid for. A knock at his office door pulled him from his thoughts. Deputy Kyle Mercer stepped inside, his expression tense. "Sheriff, we got a problem." Graves exhaled, rubbing his temples. "What now?" Mercer hesitated. "It's about that blind vet from the diner." Graves looked up, his expression darkening. "What about him?" "The Iron Vultures aren't letting it go. Word is, Blaze wants to make an example out of him." Mercer shifted. "And Sheriff, they're not acting alone." Graves pushed his chair back and stood. "You telling me the cartel's getting involved over a damn diner fight?" Mercer nodded. "I don't know why, but they see him as a problem." Blaze put out the word. "Ethan Hayes is a dead man walking." Graves swore under his breath. He didn't know Ethan personally, but he knew his type of man who wouldn't back down, no matter the odds. And in this town, that kind of man didn't last long. Out in the desert, far from the neon lights of Silver Creek, Ethan Hayes sat on his porch, sipping a cold beer. The night air was crisp, carrying the distant sound of coyotes howling in the hills. At his feet, Rex lay motionless, eyes locked on the darkness beyond. He could sense it. Something was coming. Ethan exhaled, setting his bottle down. He didn't need his eyes to know the truth. He had just stepped into a war. And war was the one thing he still knew how to fight. The next morning, Ethan stood outside his cabin, feeling the heat of the rising sun on his face. His fingers traced the worn surface of his combat knife, a habit he had developed over the years. Rex sat beside him, ears perked, his body tense. Something wasn't right. Then he heard it: engines. The distant rumble of motorcycles echoed through the desert, growing louder by the second. Ethan didn't need to see to know who it was. The Iron Vultures were coming. Ethan exhaled slowly, bracing himself. He had spent the last few years trying to avoid fights, trying to live a quiet life. But trouble had a way of finding him. The first bike skidded to a stop, kicking up a cloud of dust. Derek Blaze Sullivan dismounted, followed by 4 of his men. "Morning, old man," Blaze sneered. "Hope you got a good night's sleep." Ethan stayed still, calm, calculated. "Not interested in whatever you're selling," he said. Blaze chuckled, stepping closer. "You think this is a joke? You embarrassed me last night. That's bad for business. So here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna apologize, right here, right now." Ethan smirked. "Or what? You gonna cry about it?" Blaze's expression darkened. or we burn this place to the ground with you and your mud inside." Rex growled. Ethan tilted his head slightly. He could hear their movements, the sound of boots shifting in the dirt, the subtle click of a gun being cocked. They weren't just here to threaten him. They were here to kill him. Ethan sighed, his grip tightening around his knife. "You should have walked away when you had the chance." Blaze's patience snapped. "Kill him." Chaos erupted. One of the bikers lunged forward, but before he could react, Rex struck first, launching at him with terrifying speed, knocking him to the ground with a snarl. Ethan moved like a ghost, stepping inside the attack of the second man, disarming him in a single, fluid motion. The third man tried to draw his gun, but Ethan slammed an elbow into his ribs before twisting the weapon out of his grip. Blaze cursed, pulling his own pistol. Ethan heard the movement and turned too late. A gunshot rang out. Pain flared through Ethan's shoulder, but he didn't go down. Instead, he gritted his teeth and charged forward. Blaze barely had time to react before Ethan slammed into him, knocking the gun from his hand. They hit the ground hard, fists flying. Blaze was strong, but Ethan had been trained for war. With a final, brutal punch, Blaze collapsed, gasping for breath. The remaining bikers scrambled to their feet, dragging their leader away. "This ain't over," one of them shouted before they jumped onto their bikes and sped off. Ethan stood there, blood dripping from his wound, breathing heavily. Rex trotted over, eyes locked on the retreating bikers. Ethan exhaled. No, this wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ethan sat on his porch, pressing a rag against his bleeding shoulder. The pain was manageable, he'd had worse. What bothered him more was what came next. The Iron Vultures wouldn't take this loss lightly, and Blaze wasn't the type to let humiliation slide. He had pushed them, and now they would push back harder. A car pulled up, tires crunching against the dirt road. He recognized the engine sound before he heard her voice. "You look like hell," Jessica Monroe said, stepping out of her black Dodge Charger. "Didn't know today was Fight Club at your place." Ethan smirked. "Guess I missed the memo." She tossed him a med kit. "Sheriff Graves sent me. Word is, Blaze is out for blood. And he's not alone." Ethan stiffened. "Cartel," Jessica nodded. "La Sombra Negra has been working with the Vultures. At first, they were just using them for small-time protection rackets, but now, they're expanding. Fast. We intercepted a shipment last week, chemicals, lab equipment. They're setting up something big, and Silver Creek is the perfect test site." Ethan exhaled. "So, what's their play?" Jessica crossed her arms. "Control. First, they lock the town down with fear-burned businesses, silence people who resist. Then, they flood the streets with a new synthetic opioid. Not just any drug, this one's designed to be instantly addictive. One hit, and you're theirs for life." Ethan clenched his jaw. "You're saying they're not just selling drugs, they're making slaves." Jessica's face was grim. "Exactly." Silence stretched between them. Ethan already knew what she was going to ask. "I'm retired," he muttered. Jessica scoffed. "Yeah. Tell that to the 4 guys you just put in the dirt." She stepped closer. "Listen, I get it. You fought your war, paid your price. But this is happening in your backyard. And if we don't stop it now, Silver Creek will be just another ghost town under cartel rule." Ethan ran a hand through his short-cropped hair. He wanted to walk away. He really did. But deep down, he knew the truth. Some wars don't end just because you're tired of fighting. Jessica handed him a file. "Sheriff Graves found something. Blaze and his crew have been seen making runs out to an abandoned factory outside town. We think it's their new production site." Ethan flipped through the photos. Empty trucks going in, full ones coming out, armed guards patrolling the perimeter. This wasn't just a drug lab, it was a fortress. Rex let out a low growl. Ethan didn't need to ask why. Jessica's phone buzzed. She checked the message, her face darkening. "Shit. Blaze just put a bounty on your head. 5 grand to whoever takes you out." Ethan smirked. "Only 5. I'm insulted." Jessica shot him a look. "You're gonna need more than sarcasm to survive this." Ethan tossed the bloody rag aside and stood up. "Then I guess I better get started." The war for Silver Creek had begun. The night was unnaturally quiet. Ethan Hayes crouched near the rusted perimeter fence of the abandoned factory, his fingers brushing over Rex's harness in a silent command. The Belgian Malinois remained still, ears perked, waiting. 100 yards ahead, 2 armed guards patrolled lazily, cigarettes glowing in the darkness. The factory loomed behind them, its windows blacked out, but Ethan could hear the faint hum of machinery inside. This wasn't just a drug lab. This was a full-scale production facility. Jessica's intel had been right, Blaze, and the Iron Vultures were guarding something much bigger than street-level deals. This was cartel territory now. And tonight, Ethan was going to burn it to the ground. He touched his earpiece. "Jessica, you in position." Jessica Monroe's voice came through, steady. "Northside rooftop. 2 snipers, 1 lookout. I'll handle them." Ethan smirked. "Guess that leaves the front door for me." Jessica snorted. "Try not to get yourself killed." Ethan drew his silenced pistol, exhaling slowly. He had fought wars in jungles and deserts, in cities and back alleys. But this was personal. He signaled to Rex. "Go." Like a ghost, Rex slipped through the darkness, circling behind the first guard. Before the men even registered a threat, Rex lunged, clamping his powerful juzer on the guard's arm, dragging him down silently. The second guard barely had time to turn before Ethan closed the gap. 1 precise strike to the throat, and the man collapsed without a sound. Ethan retrieved the first guard's radio. "Time to see how deep this place went." "All clear at the gate," he whispered, mimicking the guard's voice. A response crackled back. "Copy. Boss wants extra security near the loading docks. Shipment's moving soon." Ethan exchanged a glance with Rex. Shipment. That meant this was their last chance. He moved swiftly, pressing himself against the warehouse wall. Jessica's voice came through again. "Snipers down. You've got an opening." Ethan adjusted his grip on his pistol and whispered, "Then let's get to work." Inside, the air was thick with chemical fumes. Rows of metal vats and conveyor belts lined the factory floor, workers in masks moving between them. Armed men stood at key positions, not just bikers, but cartel enforcers. These weren't street thugs. These were trained killers. And at the center of it all, standing on an elevated platform, was Derek Blaze Sullivan. Ethan's jaw tightened. Blaze's face was still bruised from their last fight, but his cocky smirk remained. "All right, boys," Blaze called out, lighting a cigar. "Let's get this show on the road. In 1 hour, we roll out. Boss wants the first batch hitting Phoenix by sunrise." Ethan's grip tightened on his weapon. He had 1 hour to tear this place apart. He exhaled, steadying himself. Then he stepped into the fire. Ethan moved with precision, weaving between stacks of crates as he assessed the battlefield. The factory was a death trap, guards at every entrance, security cameras sweeping the floor, and Blaze standing like a king overseeing his empire. If Ethan wanted to take this place down, he needed to move fast. He tapped his earpiece. "Jessica, how much C4 did you bring?" Jessica's voice was laced with amusement. "Enough to turn this place into a crater." "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Ethan smirked. "Yeah. But first, I need a distraction." He pulled a flashbang from his belt, rolling it across the floor toward the center of the factory. A second later, boom. The explosion of white light and sound sent workers scrambling, knocking several guards off balance. Ethan moved. His first shot dropped the cartel enforcer near the loading dock. His second took out a biker reaching for his rifle. By the time the rest reacted, Ethan had already closed the distance, weaving between cover with military precision. Rex tore through the chaos, bringing down a guard before vanishing into the shadows again. Blaze roared, grabbing a rifle. "Find him. Kill that son of a..." His words cut off as Jessica fired from the rafters, her sniper round shattering a floodlight, plunging half the warehouse into darkness. "You're welcome," she muttered through the comms. Ethan pressed forward, bullets whizzing past him as he slid behind a steel pillar. 2 guards rushed toward him. Bad move. He sidestepped the first, slamming his elbow into the man's throat before grabbing his weapon and firing point blank into the second. More cartel soldiers poured in, firing wildly. Ethan dove behind a stack of barrels as rounds shredded through metal. Then, the factory alarm blared. A new voice crackled through the intercom. "Diego Valdez. I don't know who you are," the cartel boss said, his tone eerily calm. "But you've made a mistake coming here." Ethan clenched his jaw. "No, the mistake was letting me get this far." He tapped his earpiece. "Jessica, detonate charges on my mark." He reached the control panel, ripping out the power cables. Sparks flew, and the factory's conveyor belts ground to a halt. The operation was dead in the water. Blaze saw it too. No, no, no. He grabbed a shotgun, fury in his eyes. You're dead, Hayes. Ethan didn't give him the chance. He moved fast, dodging the first blast before slamming Blaze's head into a steel beam. The biker staggered, blood dripping from his forehead, but he wasn't done. He swung wildly, catching Ethan's injured shoulder, sending pain ripping through his body. For a moment, Blaze had the upper hand. He grabbed Ethan by the collar, slamming him onto a conveyor belt. Should have stayed in retirement, he hissed, raising his shotgun. Then Rex struck. The Malinois hit Blaze like a missile, jaws clamping onto his arm. The shotgun fired, the blast going wide as Blaze screamed. Ethan pushed himself up, ignoring the pain. He grabbed a nearby crowbar and swung hard, a sickening crack as it connected with Blaze's jaw. The biker collapsed. Ethan exhaled, heart pounding. Jessica. Now, outside, the night erupted in flames. The factory exploded, fire engulfing the cartel's empire. Ethan watched the inferno consume everything. Silver Creek was safe for now. Ethan stood at the edge of the burning factory, his breath steady despite the chaos around him. Flames licked the sky, casting an orange glow over the desert. The explosion had taken out half the building, but cartel enforcers were still scrambling, some firing blindly into the darkness, others trying to flee. Jessica's voice crackled through his earpiece. Multiple vehicles leaving the site. Valdez isn't here. This was just one of his operations. Ethan clenched his jaw. He had known this wouldn't end tonight, but seeing the factory reduced to rubble was a start. Rex stood beside him, his fur bristling as he scanned the area. Ethan gave him a quick pat before moving toward Blaze's body. The biker leader groaned, still barely conscious, blood dripping from his mouth. Should have killed me when you had the chance, he rasped. Ethan crouched, grabbing Blaze by the collar, his voice low and cold. You work for Valdez. Where is he? Blaze spat blood onto the dirt, laughing weakly. You think you won? You think burning this place down changes anything? Valdez owns this state. You're nothing but a thorn in his side. And soon, you'll be dead just like the rest of this town. Ethan didn't flinch. He had dealt with men like Blaze before, small-time thugs who thought they were invincible because they stood behind bigger monsters. He tightened his grip. Where is he? Blaze chuckled again, shaking his head. Doesn't matter. You can't stop him. Ethan exhaled sharply before slamming Blaze's head against the dirt, knocking him out cold. Jessica approached, her gun still drawn. Sheriff Graves just called in. His men are securing the roads, but some of the cartel's muscle slipped through. They'll regroup. Ethan stood, rolling his injured shoulder. Then we hunt them down before they can. Jessica gave him a look. You really think this ends here? Ethan glanced at the burning wreckage. No, but it's a hell of a start. They left the factory behind, the fire still raging in the rearview mirror as they drove back towards Silver Creek. The town was quiet when they arrived, the streets empty, but the tension still hung in the air. They stopped outside Maggie's diner, where Sheriff Graves and his deputies were waiting. The old lawman looked tired, but there was a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Hell of a mess you made, Graves said, looking at Ethan. Cartel's gonna retaliate. Ethan nodded. Let them. Graves studied him for a moment, then sighed. You know, before tonight, I thought this town was a lost cause. Maybe I was wrong. Ethan smirked. Maybe. Jessica leaned against the car, arms crossed. So what now? Valdez is still out there. He's not going to let this slide. Ethan looked at Rex, then back at Jessica. Then I guess I'm not done yet. Far out in the desert, beneath a moonless sky, Diego Valdez sat inside his black SUV, watching the fire in the distance. His jaw was tight, his fingers drumming against the leather seat. A man like him didn't get to the top by ignoring threats. Ethan Hayes had just made himself one. He turned to his lieutenant. Send word. I want that blind bastard dead. And this time, no mistakes. The war for Silver Creek wasn't over. It was just beginning.